Hi, welcome to CT 745 Q&A project. My name is Mack. I'm currently a 7th through 12th grade resource ELA teacher. I'm in my 8th year in my current school district. My question evolves slightly from my original proposal based on what I was finding in the research. The question I explored was EL's best practices in placement and grouping, and how those groupings and best practices align with Washington state mandates for ELs. In this presentation, I will share an overview of my process and findings, some key takeaways, the answer I arrived at, and what implications the answer has on professional practices, and some next steps that should be further explored. I culminated 2 binders of information, including a podcast and an interview, and watched a video on ESSA online. Once I was fairly certain I had what I needed, I spent some time looking at my research and categorized it into 3 categories with labels. 1, support state mandates. 2, best practices. And 3, placement or groupings for ELs. Throughout this presentation, some of the research is hyperlinked for your viewing. I would recommend some time on the OSPI website, as it has quite a bit of relevant information in Washington state mandates for ELs. A few key takeaways is creating an environment in which dual language and bilingualism is celebrated, encouraged, and treated equitably. Teacher placement can be detrimental or beneficial and is part of Washington state mandates for recruiting, training, and retaining highly qualified teachers. There was some research, for example, where novice or unqualified teachers were placed in EL classrooms that created an inequitable learning environment for those EL students. Part of Washington state mandates is looking at equal access for all students. Data was another piece that I took away, that it is so imperative that you use more than one piece of data, and this was contrary to some alignment things with mandated by Washington state, where they were predominantly using the English language proficiency 21 assessment as their guide for placement for ELs. Instructional supports is also one of those things that stood out to me, because I got a lot of best practices, especially looking at different ways of grouping ELs and depending on what level at which that EL student is placed. And then I just want to be able to make sure that I'm able to advocate for students in new ways that will create a more equitable and cohesive environment for ELs in my school district. So here's the answer to my research question. You have to know and understand your EL student family. I must use strategies that support the student's native language and strategies appropriate for supporting their learning of English. Placement must use multiple points of data that also includes daily work and conversations that include the student. Grouping should be carefully considered, and use of one of the models recommended by the state should be implemented in your district. As far as alignment with the state data, we are fortunate that we predominantly are only having to make considerations in placement and grouping for one language, what makes following the state mandates for smaller class sizes, choosing one of their 6 models, easy to align with best practices in placement and in groupings of ELs. The bilingual migrant and graduation specialist I interviewed commented that she doesn't know how schools on the west side of the state are able to align placement and grouping with best practices with what the state mandates, because they're working with 32 plus different languages. So some of the things that I came across further research and may impact the school I'm working in on meeting those state mandates for ELs is the idea of long-term English learners. In the research that I saw, California is the one rolling out this term, and it's really looking at those students who are typically born in the United States and have received almost all of their education in the US, and yet yearly make no growth. Continued effort in using title money as indicated by state to provide professional development for teachers, train them and retain those teachers. Also, recruiting teachers poses a challenge as mandated by the state. In the state of Washington, we are currently experiencing a teacher shortage. And not only that, but qualified teachers, the ones we want to retain, are leaving the classroom for other endeavors. Lastly, equity will continue to be called into action and drive my work. Is what I'm doing, or we as educators, providing an equitable environment? And does the state's plan account for equitable learning for ELs? It's in their paperwork, Access for All. And I just want to make sure that what we are doing is also mandated by the state, but not just mandated. I want it to feel valid and important, and I want it to be what drives our placement, not just one test, but the whole student, their family, what's important to them. And one thing that I have concerns about is that if students don't have an overall average of 4s and 5s in all categories tested, they are considered not proficient and have to then retake the entire test over again the next year. This idea has been a topic of conversation among my RTI team that it creates resentment in some students. If they've proven themselves proficient in a certain category, why are they being retested over and over again in this category? I'd like to see my district adopt a plan for recruiting teachers of color and investing back in the hiring of teachers who are products of the school district. Continue to understand my students and their family and language, and being more intentional with that information when advocating for student placement. Also, I want to make sure that as a district that we are careful that the ELP 21 is not the only thing driving our placement of EL students. Thank you for your time and attending to this PowerPoint presentation. I'm Mack, and I will see you again soon.